1 Corinthians 9, Paul became all things to all people to win them to Jesus.
1 Corinthians chapter 9 continues the discussion on the freedoms of a believer. Specifically, Paul defends his apostleship and the rights he has as an apostle, including the right to receive financial support. However, he also explains why he has chosen not to exercise that right, providing an example of how a believer's freedom can be voluntarily limited for the sake of the gospel.
Exegesis by sections. Verses 1 to 14. Paul's rights as an apostle.
Paul begins by asserting his apostleship, stating that he has seen Jesus, the Lord, and he has been instrumental in bringing many Corinthians to faith. He defends his right to financial support by providing several arguments from everyday life: soldiers, vineyard planters, shepherds, the law of Moses, and not muzzling an ox. He also mentions the practice of other apostles. Paul establishes that those who proclaim the gospel have the right to get their living from preaching the gospel.
Verses 15 to 18. Paul's refusal to use his rights. Despite his rights, Paul explains that he has not used any of them. He said that he would rather die than to allow anyone to deprive him of his grounds for boasting. His approach to preaching the gospel is not voluntary but a duty, and woe to him if he does not preach. If he does this willingly, he has a reward, but if unwillingly, he is entrusted with a stewardship. So, his reward is to offer the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of his rights as an apostle. Verses 19 to 27. Paul's self-denial for the sake of the gospel. Paul declares that though he is free from all people, he has made himself a servant to all, so that he might win more of them to the Lord. He explains his approach to ministry as becoming all things to all people. To the Jews, he became like a Jew. To those under the law, he became like one who was under the law. To those outside the law, he became like one who was outside of the law. To the weak, he became as one who was weak. He said that he did all of this for the sake of the gospel, so that he may share in its blessings. Paul goes on to use the metaphor of an athletic competition to emphasize the discipline and effort required in his ministry. He disciplines his body and keeps it under control, lest after preaching to others, he himself should be disqualified. Overall summary.
1 Corinthians chapter 9 revolves around Paul's discussion of his rights as an apostle, and his decision to forego them for the sake of the gospel. He defends his apostleship and the rights that come with it, including the right to receive material support. However, Paul chooses not to use these rights, so that they would not be a hindrance to the gospel of Christ. This chapter is a powerful example of self-denial and service to others for the purpose of advancing the gospel and winning more people to Christ.